Imagine waking up one morning and noticing a familiar pattern that has shadowed every decision you've ever made. You know the path you should take, the choice that aligns with your highest values, yet somehow, time and again, you follow another. Why is it that despite the clarity of reason, your actions often betray your intentions? Why do anger, fear, desire, and envy seem to grip you with a power that logic cannot match? Think about it. How many times have you acted against your own judgment, regretted moments that should have been within your control, only to find yourself enslaved by impulses that seemed larger than yourself? Emotions are not merely reactions, they are forces. And yet, unlike the calm voice of logic, these forces are not neutral. They twist your perception, whispering subtle lies, exaggerating dangers, inflating slights, and magnifying your own desires. They make you think you are powerless when, in truth, the power was always within your reach. But power alone is not enough. Awareness alone is insufficient. Because to truly see the way emotions control you, you must first confront a simple, uncomfortable truth. Much of your life has been lived not by choice, but by reaction. Consider for a moment the experience of anger. A friend or colleague criticizes you, or perhaps a loved one forgets something important, and suddenly your chest tightens, your thoughts darken, and your voice rises. You know at some rational level that the insult was minor or unintended, yet in that moment reason flees. The mind that could calmly weigh facts and respond wisely is paralyzed, and your emotions dictate your actions. You lash out, retreat, or stew in resentment. Later, you may recognize your misstep, yet the pattern repeats itself, as if trapped in a cycle beyond comprehension. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king of Rome, understood this intimately. He lived at the pinnacle of power, a man responsible for empires, yet he faced the same internal storms that haunt every human being. In his meditations, he reminds himself, and through history, he reminds us that it is not the events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. The harsh word, the betrayal, the obstacle. None of these have the power to control you unless you permit them. And yet, the permission is often unconscious, given freely to the first surge of feeling that arises in the mind. Think about how often fear dictates your decisions. You hesitate to speak, to act, to claim what you desire. Your mind rehearses failure, rejection, humiliation, as if these imagined futures are already certain. Logic offers reassurance, probability, reason, evidence, yet it is drowned out by the visceral, pounding voice of emotion. Desire, too, exerts its subtle tyranny. We pursue fleeting pleasures with a fervor that defies reason, chasing outcomes that promise satisfaction but deliver emptiness. And all the while, the rational mind stands aside, powerless or ignored, a quiet observer watching its own authority evaporate. This is not weakness. This is human nature. Yet, Marcus Aurelius offers a path beyond it, not through suppression, not through denial, but through understanding and mastery. He teaches that to live with wisdom, one must first recognize the invisible chains that bind them, the subtle strings that emotions pull in every direction. Only then can one begin to disentangle reason from reaction, self from impulse, and choice from instinct. And so today, we embark on an exploration of this age-old struggle, one that has echoed through history, one that Marcus Aurelius himself confronted with unflinching honesty. Together, we will examine how emotions dominate our actions more than logic, why reason is often powerless in the face of feeling, and, most importantly, how we might reclaim the authority that is always, secretly, ours. If this struggle feels familiar, you are not alone. And if you wish to master it not just once, but for life, subscribe. Not for me, but for yourself. Each video here is another step, another weapon in your battle to reclaim your mind. But before we can confront mastery, we must first understand the enemy. Not the person who angers you, not the circumstance that frightens you, not even the desire that tempts you, The true force that enslaves you is within it, is the emotion itself, undisciplined, unexamined, yet claiming dominion over your every thought and choice. And only by turning the lens inward, observing without judgment, can we begin to see the patterns that rule our lives, hidden beneath the surface of consciousness. So ask yourself, when was the last time you acted fully in alignment with reason? When did you resist the pull of anger, the weight of fear, or the lure of desire, and feel the quiet satisfaction of deliberate action? Chances are, it has been rare, fleeting, and yet profoundly instructive. For in those moments, you glimpse the possibility of mastery, the hint of freedom that is always present, waiting for the mind to recognize it. This journey will not be simple. It will require confronting the truths that most prefer to ignore, the way your mind exaggerates slights, the illusions your desires construct, the subtle tyranny of resentment and fear. But the reward is extraordinary. The realization that while emotions are powerful, they are not absolute. They can be observed, understood, and, eventually, guided by reason. And in that guidance lies the quiet, unshakable freedom that Marcus Aurelius so tirelessly pursued. Think about the last time you felt fear creep in, not the sharp, immediate fear of danger, but the quiet, insidious kind that lingers in the mind, shaping choices without announcing itself. Perhaps it was a hesitation to speak your truth at work, a decision deferred because you feared judgment, or a relationship left unclaimed because the possibility of rejection loomed larger than the promise of connection. You may have told yourself, "I'm just being cautious. I'm making a practical choice." Yet beneath the rational explanation, a deeper force was at work. Your emotion had taken the wheel, steering your life, while logic remained a silent passenger. Or consider anger. Not the fiery, explosive anger that erupts in a moment of frustration, but the simmering resentment that builds silently over weeks, months, years. You replay events in your mind, imagining the perfect retort, the justice you deserved but never received. Logic might remind you that this resentment only poisons your own peace, yet still, you return to it, feeding it, giving it shape and power. Anger, unchecked, is a thief. It steals clarity, patience, and ultimately, freedom. And we hand it over freely, moment after moment, convinced that the emotion is stronger than ourselves. Desire, too, is a subtle master. We chase fleeting pleasures, sweets, social approval, status, affirmation from others, as if they hold the key to fulfillment. Logic can tell us that this pursuit is temporary, that the satisfaction will fade, that contentment cannot be bought or borrowed. Yet the emotional mind, ever restless, whispers in the opposite voice, "If you do not have this now, you will suffer. You are incomplete. You are lacking." And so we act against reason, sacrificing long-term peace for immediate gratification, trading freedom for the illusion of security. Marcus Aurelius knew these patterns intimately because they are not modern inventions, they are human nature. The struggle of the mind against the tyranny of emotion has existed for millennia. And yet, he teaches us that the very things that seem to enslave us, the anger, the fear, the desire, are not inherently outside our control. They are elements of ourselves, forces within, responding to judgments and interpretations that we have learned, accepted, or simply never examined. The storm rages only because we give it permission, because we mistake reaction for reality. Have you ever been triggered by someone else, by a word, a glance, or a gesture, and felt your body tighten before your mind could intervene? Have you noticed how quickly reason retreats? How swiftly emotion seizes the stage, commanding thought, speech, and action? These moments are not failures of logic. They are reminders that emotions are wired to act faster than conscious thought, that the human mind evolved for survival and rapid response, not for deliberate reflection. And yet, reflection is exactly what Marcus Aurelius demands. He tells us that it is in the reflection, the deliberate turning inward, that mastery begins. Emotions are powerful because they operate in layers we seldom perceive. The first layer is the immediate reaction, the anger, the fear, the desire. The second layer is the interpretation we attach to that reaction. Why did this happen? What does it mean? The third layer is the story we tell ourselves about the reaction, the narrative that either amplifies the emotion or diminishes it. And if we are not vigilant, these layers compound, each feeding the next, until the storm of feeling appears unstoppable. Consider grief. Logic may remind you that loss is natural, that impermanence is the law of life. Yet grief, when unexamined, can consume entire months, twisting thoughts and behaviors, coloring every interaction, every decision. Marcus Aurelius does not suggest that we deny grief, nor does he demand emotional suppression. Rather, he insists that we observe it, understand its origin, and allow reason to guide its expression. The Stoic mind does not crush the feeling, it channels it, transforming a potential tyrant into a teacher. Anger, fear, desire, grief. They are all teachers if we are willing to look closely. But most people never do. Most surrender to the waves of emotion, believing that to resist is unnatural or impossible. They confuse the immediacy of feeling with the inevitability of action. And in this surrender lies the quiet tragedy of human life. We know what is right, yet we are swept away, time and again, by forces we could learn to master. Now, imagine living differently. Imagine experiencing the same anger, the same fear, the same desire, yet pausing, not reacting automatically, but observing. You feel the heat rise in your chest, the tension in your muscles, the narrative forming in your mind. And instead of giving in, you ask, is this within my control? Does this serve me? Does it reflect my true values? In that pause, there is freedom. In that questioning, there is power. Marcus Aurelius believed this pause, this deliberate intervention, is the birthplace of self-mastery. But to reach that pause, to truly stand apart from the immediacy of emotion, requires more than theory, it requires practice. It requires relentless self-examination, daily reflection, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Because the mind will resist. The habits of emotion are deeply entrenched, forged over decades of reaction. They will fight to maintain dominance, whispering that reason is weak, that reflection is unnecessary, that control is impossible. And yet, the Stoic path is not about perfection. It is about gradual reclamation, moment by moment, choice by choice, until the storms no longer dictate the course of your life. Marcus Aurelius was not only an emperor commanding legions and governing an empire, he was also a man confronting the internal chaos that resides in every human heart. Power, wealth, and position did not grant him immunity from the turbulence of emotion. He too was seized by anger, tempted by desire, haunted by fear, and weighed down by sorrow. What set him apart was not that he felt less than others, but that he reflected more deeply, recorded his observations, and sought to reclaim authority over his inner world. In his meditations, Marcus writes, not as a teacher of others, but as a student of himself. He addresses his own mind with reminders that are at once profound and painfully human. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The wisdom is deceptively simple, yet its application is anything but easy. Most people, when confronted by provocation, immediately surrender to their first emotional surge. Aurelius suggests a different path: to pause, observe, and deliberate. Think about what this means in practice. Imagine someone insults you. The initial reaction is immediate anger flares. Your pulse quickens. Your thoughts ignite with retaliation. Logic tells you that retaliation is unnecessary, that the insult may be trivial or even undeserved. Yet the emotion insists on action. Marcus Aurelius would ask you to take a step back. Is this insult within your control? Will giving in to anger serve your life or values? He reminds himself that external events are neutral. It is the judgment we attach to them that creates suffering. Consider also desire, the longing for wealth, for recognition, for the approval of others. Marcus Aurelius notes that these are distractions from the path of virtue. He writes that a wise person seeks not the pleasures of the world, but the mastery of self. Desire, when left unchecked, is a subtle master, guiding actions under the illusion of choice. Yet the Stoic mind, trained in reflection and discipline, recognizes the impulse, examines it, and decides deliberately whether to follow it. In this recognition lies freedom. And then there is fear. Fear of failure, fear of pain, fear of rejection, the quiet chains that bind most human minds. Aurelius confronts these as well, reminding himself that the anticipation of suffering often exceeds the reality of it. He urges, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. The clarity here is profound. Fear only controls us when we grant it authority. And yet, we grant it freely, habitually, without reflection. Perhaps the most striking element of Aurelius's meditations is his emphasis on continual vigilance. Emotional mastery is not a single achievement. It is a lifelong discipline. Each day, he reminds himself to observe his own impulses, to correct the distortions of judgment, to align action with reason. He treats the mind as a garden. Emotions are seeds, some poisonous, some nourishing. By careful attention, reflection, and choice, the gardener cultivates growth while uprooting destructive patterns. And this is where his philosophy resonates so deeply with our modern struggle. The mind is a battlefield, not between right and wrong externally, but within oneself. Emotions are not merely obstacles. They are indicators, signals pointing to judgments, attachments, and beliefs that have yet to be examined. Aurelius invites us to observe, not suppress, to understand, not resist. Anger, fear, desire, these are not enemies to be crushed, but teachers to be heeded. Think about how often your own mind has betrayed you, not through malice, but through neglect. You have allowed fear to dictate choices, anger to consume interactions, desire to drive decisions that ultimately felt hollow. Aurelius would not chastise this tendency. He would simply remind you that awareness is the first step toward mastery. The moment you notice the grip of emotion, you have already begun to reclaim authority. It is in the noticing that power awakens, subtle, yet profound, waiting to be exercised through reason, reflection, and choice. Marcus Aurelius's life and writings demonstrate that emotional mastery is not an abstract concept reserved for philosophers. It is a practical necessity for anyone seeking clarity, peace, and freedom. The challenge is immense because the mind resists. The emotional impulses that overwhelm us are not errors. They are deeply ingrained, products of evolution, culture, and habit. Yet the Stoic path offers a methodology. Pause, observe, question, deliberate, act. In each deliberate pause, reason asserts itself. In each conscious act, the soul strengthens. Anger, fear, desire, grief. Each emotion arrives not as a polite suggestion, but as a commanding force, demanding attention, bending perception, and shaping action. To understand why emotions often overpower reason, we must recognize the subtle ways they operate beneath consciousness, pulling the strings of thought and behavior while logic waits silently in the wings. Consider anger first. It begins as a spark, a perceived insult, a betrayal, an injustice. In an instant, the mind reacts, flooding the body with chemicals designed to prepare for conflict. Heart races, muscles tighten, thoughts narrow to the object of the perceived offense. The logic that might have reminded you of perspective, forgiveness, or prudence is silenced. You act before you reflect. Later, reason returns, examining the aftermath with regret. But the moment has passed. This is not weakness. It is evolution in motion. Our minds evolve to respond rapidly to threat, to protect the self and preserve survival. Yet in the modern world, threats are rarely life or death. They are often social, relational, or internal. Anger, when unchecked, misfires, dictating behavior that reason knows is unnecessary, even harmful. Fear, too, wields a quiet dominion. Unlike anger, fear is often invisible, whispering warnings, exaggerating dangers, inflating consequences. Logic says, the presentation went well. The email will likely be received neutrally. The relationship may recover. Fear responds, no, you will fail. You will be judged. You will be abandoned. Fear hijacks attention, constricts possibilities, and paralyzes action. It does so by exploiting an ancient truth. The mind reacts faster to potential loss than to calculated gain. Logic, slow and deliberate, cannot compete with the immediacy of fear. And so we remain trapped, unable to act, unable to speak, unable to live in alignment with reason. Desire operates differently, yet with equal potency. It seduces quietly, promising fulfillment while obscuring consequence. You crave recognition, wealth, affection, or validation. The mind calculates the risks, weighs the long-term costs, but desire whispers insistently, if you do not act now, you will remain incomplete. The logic of prudence falters, and choices are made in service of fleeting pleasure rather than enduring purpose. In this way, desire becomes a master, guiding behavior beneath the illusion of free will. Even grief, which seems passive, exerts an undeniable control. The loss of a loved one, a dream deferred, or a chapter of life closed draws the mind into reflection, rumination, and sorrow. Logic may counsel acceptance, mindfulness, or the passing of time. Yet grief has its own temporal logic. It slows cognition, magnifies emotional perception, and colors every thought. We are not wrong to grieve. Yet when left unexamined, grief becomes a hidden director of decisions, shaping reactions long after the event that triggered it. What Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics illuminate is that these emotions are not enemies. They are natural, inevitable aspects of the human condition. The problem arises when they dominate without reflection. They overpower logic because they operate faster, more intensely, and with the subtle authority of evolutionary imperative. Logic is deliberate, slow, and deliberate. Emotion is immediate, immersive, and compelling. The conflict is built into our biology and our psychology. Yet there is a deeper, more profound reason why emotions often seem irresistible. Our judgments amplify them. Anger is rarely raw. It is shaped by perception, by narrative, by interpretation. Fear is magnified by imagined scenarios, by the stories we tell ourselves about what might happen. Desire is intensified by comparison, by longing, by attachment to imagined futures. It is not the emotion alone that dominates, it is the unexamined story we attach to it. And herein lies the path to mastery. Change the story, and the emotion loses its tyranny. Marcus Aurelius writes, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. This is not mere philosophy, it is a practical observation of the mind. When anger, fear, or desire arise, pause and examine, what am I telling myself? What story is amplifying this emotion? Is it grounded in reality? Or is it a projection of past wounds, insecurities, or imagined outcomes? By observing the story, one regains the space between stimulus and response, the space where reason can assert itself. Modern psychology echoes these insights. Cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and emotional regulation techniques all emphasize the same principle. Emotions are often amplified by cognitive distortions and unexamined narratives. By bringing awareness to the patterns, by noticing the triggers and questioning the automatic interpretations, one begins to reclaim authority. The mind that once bowed to emotion can learn to respond deliberately, with intention rather than reaction. And yet, this mastery is not instantaneous. Emotions are deeply ingrained, reinforced over decades of habit. Anger flares, fear whispers, desire seduces not because the individual is weak, but because evolution designed the mind to react before reflection. The Stoic path, like psychological practice, is a lifelong journey. Observe, reflect, question, deliberate, act. With repetition, the moments of conscious choice grow longer, and the periods of unconscious reaction shrink. Slowly, imperceptibly, the individual becomes the master of the mind rather than the servant of emotion. Now, imagine the possibilities if this mastery were realized. Consider a life in which anger no longer dictates words, fear no longer limits choices, desire no longer manipulates decisions, and grief, though felt, no longer controls action. In such a life, logic and reason are not merely abstract ideals. They are practical tools, guiding behavior in alignment with values rather than impulses. This is the vision Marcus Aurelius offers. A mind unshackled, deliberate, free to act with clarity, wisdom, and moral integrity. The path toward mastery over emotion is not theoretical. It is practical, deliberate, and above all, intentional. Marcus Aurelius did not merely write about philosophy. He lived it, often recording reminders in the quiet hours before dawn, reflections meant to guide himself through the storms of human feeling. And what he discovered is something that every modern seeker can use. The mind, though vulnerable to emotion, can be trained, disciplined, and ultimately freed. The first tool Aurelius champions is the pause. The pause is deceptively simple, yet revolutionary. When anger arises, when fear threatens, when desire tugs insistently, pause. Observe the feeling as though it were a visitor passing through a room, not the owner of the house. Notice the tightening of the chest, the acceleration of the pulse, the narrative your mind begins to construct. In that pause, you create a space between stimulus and response, a gap where reason may act. The pause is the beginning of sovereignty, the first moment in which you reclaim authority over yourself. Second is the practice of reflection. Marcus Aurelius filled notebooks with meditations, examining each day, each interaction, each surge of emotion. He asked himself, why did I react this way? What judgment led me to anger? What desire guided my action? Reflection is not self-criticism. It is observation without judgment. By observing patterns, you become aware of the triggers, the habitual responses, and the stories you tell yourself that amplify emotion. With awareness comes clarity, and with clarity comes choice. A third tool is the evaluation of control. Aurelius repeatedly reminds himself, is this within my control? Is it not? This question, deceptively simple, reshapes perspective. Fear often arises from anticipating outcomes we cannot control. Anger is often provoked by events or words beyond our influence. Desire is often attached to results that depend on the will of others. By asking this question, you distinguish what belongs to you and what does not. Only what is within your control is worth the energy of emotional engagement. The rest can be observed and released, like clouds passing across the sky. Fourth is negative visualization. Stoics did not seek pessimism. They sought clarity. By imagining loss, disappointment, or failure in advance, the mind practices resilience. When fear arises, it is often amplified by surprise or uncertainty. By rehearsing hardship consciously, the mind becomes familiar with adversity. Anger is softened by anticipation of imperfection. Desire is tempered by recognition of impermanence. This exercise trains the mind to respond with equanimity rather than react with desperation. Fifth is mindful journaling. Aurelius's meditations were not idle thoughts. They were exercises in cognitive organization, a mapping of the mind's emotional landscape. Writing down fears, desires, regrets, and aspirations externalizes them, turning intangible storms into objects of examination. The mind, once overwhelmed, gains perspective. The stories we tell ourselves, previously automatic, can now be analyzed and reshaped. Journaling is the act of making conscious what was previously unconscious. Another powerful Stoic tool is the practice of perspective. Aurelius often reminded himself of the vastness of time and the smallness of individual events. Consider how small and transient your worries are in the grand scheme of the universe. By seeing events through this lens, anger loses its intensity, fear diminishes, and desire becomes less consuming. Perspective allows reason to temper emotion, to recognize that the present turbulence is only a fragment of a much larger reality. And perhaps most importantly, Marcus Aurelius emphasizes consistency and repetition. Emotional mastery is not a singular event. It is a lifelong discipline. Each day brings opportunities to practice the pause, reflection, evaluation of control, negative visualization, journaling, and perspective. At first, these exercises may feel artificial, awkward, even futile. The mind is used to automatic response, trained over decades to yield to emotion. Yet through persistent practice, each deliberate choice strengthens the capacity to act from reason rather than reaction. To illustrate, consider anger in daily life. A colleague interrupts you during a meeting. A word triggers frustration. Without Stoic practice, the response is immediate. A retort, a harsh tone, a mental narrative of resentment. With the Stoic approach, the mind pauses, observes the rising heat of anger, questions its origin, asks whether it is within control, and acts deliberately. Perhaps you respond calmly, redirecting the conversation with clarity. Perhaps you choose silence, refusing to empower the emotion. Either way, the chain of reaction is broken, and the mind regains sovereignty. Fear, too, can be tempered. You hesitate to speak publicly or take a risk. The Stoic tools allow observation of the fear, analysis of its source, evaluation of what is within control, rehearsal through visualization, and reflection on perspective. Gradually, the anxiety diminishes. Decisions are made deliberately, aligned with values, not dictated by the primal reflexes of the mind. Desire, grief, and other potent emotions can be approached in the same deliberate manner. Marcus Aurelius understood that mastery of the mind is not about suppression, denial, or ascetic avoidance of emotion. Rather, it is about integration and deliberate action. Anger teach patience, fear teach courage, desire teach discernment, grief teach depth. When observed with reflection, these emotions are no longer tyrants but instructors, guiding the development of wisdom, self-discipline, and resilience. Finally, consider the profound liberation offered by this path. When emotions no longer control action, when the mind can pause, reflect, and act deliberately, life transforms. Decisions are no longer reactive, relationships are no longer driven by unchecked impulses, and personal integrity is strengthened. The chaos of the mind gives way to clarity. The torrent of feeling becomes a river, flowing in harmony with reason rather than overwhelming it. And in this harmony, Marcus Aurelius found the essence of freedom. A life lived intentionally, guided by the principles of virtue, anchored by reason, and informed by the wisdom of reflection.